Returning to our theme of scarcity and planetary boundaries, the planetary boundaries framework proposes thresholds to prevent damage to the global carrying capacity, where carrying capacity refers to the ability to sustain a certain amount of economic activity and implies that we face some level of absolute scarcity. Yet there is no reason for this carrying capacity to be fixed over time. Economic development through education and technological progress can increase global carrying capacity, while imprudent resource consumption can deteriorate carrying capacity. To illustrate the point that the carrying capacity is conditional on behavior further, take the example from the documentary film Cowspiracy. The human population drinks 5.2 billion gallons of water every day and eats 21 billion pounds of food, but just the world's 1.5 billion cows alone drink 45 billion gallons of water and eat 135 billion pounds of food. This isn't so much a human population issue, it's a human eat animals population issue. The deforestation on Easter Island is not an isolated case. Conservation International estimates that only 5% of original forest cover remains on New Caledonia, and Griffith and Florence estimate that on Mauritius there may be less than 2% of the original forest cover. For Madagascar, estimates of deforestation range from bad to worse than 90%, with some disagreement between the figures over the extent of the original forest cover. Madagascar is currently facing horrendous droughts. The Guardian from last May read, Madagascar's worst drought in 40 years has left more than 1 million people facing a year of desperate food shortages. The UN attributes the famine in Madagascar to the effects of climate change, as there is no violent conflict. Possibly effects are worsened because of deforestation. Lola Castro from the World Food Programme reminds us that Madagascar has virtually no responsibility in climate change, but suffers the most severe consequences. This past September, the Dutch Broadcasting Foundation, NOS, also ran a piece on the famine in Madagascar, entitled, In the South of Madagascar, cactus soup is the only meal. I had not heard about the catastrophe yet and was in Mexico, where we also eat nopal, so I first took the news lightly. But soon I realized how unimaginably dire the situation is on Madagascar. I was living together with my 3-month-old nephew with a healthy 5.5 kilo. And this Dutch article reported stories from the hospitals where children older than a year weighed less. The same article read that the World Food Programme estimates an additional $108 million aid would be needed until April to avoid worse disaster. The same day I read that Elon Musk donated $15 million to a SpaceX fundraiser to battle childhood cancer, pushing it beyond their $200 million pledge. I hope that some 0.01%ers will soon step up for Madagascar. I talked about the stories from these islands not only because they may or may not serve as examples of Malthusian catastrophes, but also because a course on islands I took a few years ago taught me that islands serve as a metaphor for global developments. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations monitors the global forest cover and reports their assessments with 5-year intervals since 1990. Between 1990 and 2015, the global forest cover has been reduced with an area larger than the size of South Africa, or about 3 times larger than California, or about 14 soccer fields per minute. The vastness of largely unspoiled habitat is still magnificent, perhaps so much so that one could be tempted to disregard or maybe even distrust statements like the 14 soccer fields per minute. The same statistic presented in another way, a decrease in the global forest cover from 31.6% to 30.6% may seem more credible and deceptively less alarming. The 3% forest cover loss over the past 25 years resembles the pace of deforestation on Easter Island, but at least we have the advantage that we recognize the deforestation is taking place. The neoclassical economic focus on relative scarcity makes it ill-equipped to study questions of optimal scale of the economy. For example, a widespread modeling assumption of constant returns to scale amounts to assuming that there is no scarce, non-augmentable resource like land, as Solov reminds us. Now, land may not be the best example of a non-augmentable resource because in some sense we have increased land either by winning it from water or in our cities by building upward. Yet, clearly there do exist non-augmentable, exhaustible, non-renewable resources that are absolutely scarce in nature and relevant to production processes. With the arrival of the Anthropocene, it is becoming increasingly dangerous to ignore that we face absolute scarcity. I have given little attention to Calles' critiques, while some are worth mentioning. As a gardener, I tend to agree with Calles in that the limit resides in the subject and the intention, not in nature, which is indifferent to our intentions, and it is our intentions that should be limited. Calles also offers me a quote to return to Malthus once more as I work towards my closing. Malthus and other early priests of capitalism constructed a picture where unlimited human wants clash with a limited world. Scarcity and growth became an inseparable pair, with limits spurring efforts for growth. My thesis is that it is only when we begin to accept the world as abundant that we can contemplate limiting our wants and limiting a safe space for our freedom. In this first lecture, I review how Malthus warned that human population has the tendency to outgrow the carrying capacity of its environment. Subsequently, how contemporary versions of limits to growth and planetary boundaries echo warnings that unlimited economic growth is unsustainable on a finite planet. We have seen evidence that the abundance of fossil fuels, rather than their scarcity, poses the first challenge to sustainability. We have just questioned whether planetary boundaries offer natural limits to human activity, or whether nature is abundant and human wants should somehow be limited. On the following slides, you can find the references I used for this lecture. For a closer inspection, you can pause the video or download the PDF from Canvas or drop me a line. Next week in Environmental Economics, we will go into public goods and the tragedy of the commons. But first, we will see each other for the tutorial either Wednesday or Thursday, depending on your work group. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions?